All right, well, we are so pleased tonight to have Dr. Sara Ellison with us. And this was sort of a last minute booking. So we're so grateful that she was able to slip in when our previous speaker for this evening had to cancel on short notice. Dr. Ellison is an astronomy professor at the University of Victoria. She studied at the University of Kent, earning her Master of Science in Physics in 1997. She earned her PhD in astronomy from the University of Cambridge in 2000. She then worked as an ESO fellow in Chile for 3 years before joining the faculty at UVic. She's a recipient of numerous honors and awards for her work, but in her leisure time, I don't know when she has any leisure time, given all of the things that she does, but in her leisure time, she snorkels, and that is what she is here to talk about tonight. So I'll turn it over to you, Sara.
Thank you very much, Joan, both for the invitation and the very kind introduction. So as you've heard, my day job is an astronomer. And so really this snorkel business is really just a sideline for me. And people often ask me how I got into this. So I'd like to start the talk with a little story about how I started cold water snorkeling around Vancouver Island. So just a reminder to mute yourselves until the questions at the end, just because we've got about 65 participants. And so otherwise it'll get a little bit noisy. So I arrived in Canada exactly 20 years ago. So as you heard in the introduction from Joan, and as you can tell by my accent, I'm originally from the UK. And my husband and I are both astronomers. And so once we'd finished our PhDs in the UK, we moved to Chile, and we were working there for 3 years because in Chile, there are amazing telescopes up in the high Atacama Desert where you can just do the best stargazing in the world. But then in 2003, we both got job offers from the University of Victoria. So we packed up our lives and moved all the way up the West Coast from Santiago to Victoria. And so we moved here in August 2003. So as I say, almost exactly 20 years ago. And that very first weekend that we were here in Victoria, it was a beautiful sunny weekend, and we borrowed a couple of bicycles and went for a long ride along the coastline. And after an hour or so of cycling, we were getting pretty warm. And so we stopped at a well-known local beach. There's this lovely, long, sandy swath of beach in Oak Bay. And we thought, we're a little bit warm, and here's this wonderful ocean. We're going to go for a dip. Now, I don't remember if at the time we noticed that there was no one else in the water and maybe wondered why that was the case. But I can tell you, as soon as we'd peeled off our layers and dashed Baywatch style into the ocean, we pretty soon realized why no one else was in there, because as denizens of BC, you all know that the water here is pretty darn chilly. And so I think our British machismo demanded that we stay in for at least a minute, but then we retreated pretty hastily back onto the warm, dry land. And so if you told me then 20 years ago that snorkeling and being in the North Pacific would be such an important part of my life, I probably would have laughed you off the beach. But now fast forward about 10 years or so, and we're now well settled in. We have a little extra person in tow, and we have bought a small cabin over on Saturn Island, which is part of the Gulf Islands. And I'm now more prepared to get into the ocean. And after a decade of observing the ocean from its surface, after kayaking and paddleboarding and beachcombing, I'm determined that I want to give this another try. And so now my husband and I, we're prepared a little bit more. We've bought ourselves a couple of old secondhand surf wetsuits, which we think is going to do the trick for keeping us warm. And so we've brought our snorkel gear along, and we're ready to jump in off the shore of Saturn Island. If any of you know, there's this fantastic stretch called Cliffside, which is really a very deep shelf that goes straight down from the shore. So we're standing there waiting to jump in when friends that we're with shout, "Wait, I see a fin." And with that, I do not exaggerate, the entirety of J-Pod came around the corner within meters of where we are about to jump in and go snorkeling. So we wait, we let the pod go past, and then in we go. And that first snorkel was enough to completely convert me to the wonders of the cold waters of the Pacific, because on that steep cliff along the south side of Saturna Island, it's just covered with anemones and sea stars and all this wonderful stuff. But the ocean was still really, really cold, and my wetsuit really did nothing to keep me very warm. And after 20 minutes, I was totally done. So this whole snorkeling business for many years just was a summer activity that we did whilst we were at our cabin for sort of short 20-minute intervals. Okay, fast forward again to 2020. I'm sure we remember it very well. All of those cancelled vacations, all of those big postponed adventures. We were meant to be going that summer to the Great Barrier Reef in Australia to snorkel with manta rays, which of course didn't happen. And so I thought, okay, this could be the long haul here. What are we going to do to kind of have our adventures closer to home? And so I set about researching how we could snorkel more comfortably, so stay warmer in our local waters. And I also needed to figure out where to go, because this spot that we'd been going to on Saturna for many years actually turned out to be a really special spot. You know, if you just pick a random beach to go snorkeling, you don't actually see terribly much. And so the researcher in me sort of tackled this in a very data-oriented way, and as I started documenting all of the places that I was going. And eventually this grew into a book that I wrote and published earlier this year. And so when I was writing this book, the goal was really to be the companion that I wish I had had when I was starting. And so what I wanted to do with that book was really tackle all of the questions that I had had. So with that, I'll start sharing my screen with my presentation. Okay, just give me 1 second whilst I move some Zoom windows around here. Okay, so when I tell people about snorkeling, there are three main questions that I always get asked. And these are the three questions that are going to kind of be the backbone of my talk tonight. So first of all, people want to know, what kind of things will I see? Because when people think about snorkeling, they think about tropical waters and corals and things like that. People don't appreciate that really the biodiversity that we have in our local waters is actually just as amazing as what you're going to see in the Caribbean or the Barrier Reef or in Hawaii. And then people very quickly ask, well, what gear do I need? Because when the water is only 8 degrees centigrade and hypothermia will nominally set in within 10 minutes, how am I going to stay warm and safe in our local waters? And then finally, where should I go? Because as I already alluded to in my introduction, if you just pick a random beach, you know, you're going to see a lot of seaweed, but you might not see a lot of anything else. And so I spent a lot of time over the COVID years researching exactly where the good spots were to go. So what will you see if you go snorkeling? Well, I think the key to answering this question is, first of all, to have a good field guide. And we are lucky that there are many options available to us. These are my two personal favorites. So Whelks to Whales is a nice kind of guidebook sized copy. So it's the kind of thing you can kind of take out with you if you're beachcombing or whatnot, but it's jam-packed with species from from mammals to seaweeds. So this is a really great one. It's got lots of nice color photos in it. The other Bible is this Marine Life of the Pacific Northwest by Andy Lamb and Bernard Hanby. You can use this as a doorstop. It's quite a big volume. It's hardbacks, a couple of inches thick. Any species that you're going to encounter in our waters is in this guide. So I mention these two as sort of complementary options, one that's sort of pocket-sized and one that is the definitive work. But I'm going to show you a few photos. So all of the photos that I'm going to show you here photos that I have taken in our local waters whilst I have been snorkeling. So I am not a scuba diver. I'm not certified to scuba dive. And so these are all things that I have seen in the top 10 meters or so in our local waters. Okay, so let's start off with sea anemones. So sea anemones are really good crowd pleasers, particularly for beginner snorkelers. They're easy to see. They're very colorful. They're often quite large and so easy to find. So I'm just going to take you through a few species of sea anemones that we find in our local waters. So I'm going to start off with the so-called rose anemone. This is quite a big one. It's very easy to identify. The trunk or the column is a very uniform, deep kind of ruby red color. The crown and the tentacles tend to come in one of two color morphs. And so I'm showing you both of them here. There's either a sort of a red color morph or a paler sort of yellowish color morph. And for a reason that I've never really understood, they often live side by side in these pairings of two different color morphs, which has got nothing to do with the gender of the species. The other name for the rose anemone, so I'm just using common names tonight, I'm not using the scientific names. The other common name for the rose anemone is the fish-eating anemone, which is very clear in that sense that many anemone species are carnivorous. And so if you pop any sort of small fish, or I like to sort of put in like a little mussel or something into the mouth parts of these anemones, you'll see it gobble it up very vociferously. I actually love taking pictures of anemone mouth parts. They seem almost like science fiction to me. That sort of the complicated folds of these mouth parts I find endlessly fascinating. Another anemone which is often confused with the rose anemone is the painted anemone. So it can also have a dark red column, but sometimes it's a more mottled pattern. But the way to distinguish the painted anemone is that it has much shorter tentacles and they always have this strong banding on them. So both the painted anemone and the rose anemone really like high current environments. And so you find these a lot around the southern and the outer coast of Vancouver Island, not so much on the Strait of Georgia side and around Vancouver, just because the currents through there and the surf is a lot milder. So those two anemones have these quite tall trunks to them, but many anemone species like to bury themselves into the sand or into the substrate. So this is a very pretty one called the stubby rose anemone. And again, it comes in a few different color morphs. The two most common ones are either this kind of pink color or this sage green. And this species particularly likes to live near a rock sand interface. So if you have some boulders or a rocky cliff that then meets a sandy bottom, often you see these stubby rose anemones snuggled up on that boundary. Another one that likes to bury itself is the moonglow anemone. This is one of my favorites. It's a smaller species. The typical disc is just a few inches across, but the quality of the color in this anemone is luminous. It's almost spectral, and so I think the name moonglow is very fitting. And again, you see this in a few different color varieties. When you see the green one, which is the one I'm showing here on the left, that's because there are symbiotic algae living within the animal itself, and that's what's giving it its this characteristic green color. Another green anemone that is naturally green, not because it has the algae living in it, is this green surf anemone. Now, these can be really quite big. Sometimes they bury themselves, but sometimes they're freestanding, and the columns can grow up to a foot tall, and the crowns can be, again, 10 inches or so across. As the name implies, this species loves the outer coast. It loves to be pounded by the surf and the swell. So this is a West Coast speciality. So again, not one that you'll see commonly in the Strait of Georgia, but all up the west coast of Vancouver Island. And this is one that's actually often seen just in tide pools. It really likes the intertidal zone. You don't need to be in the subtidal to spot this one. This one is also carnivorous, and because it's quite large, it can actually tolerate quite large prey. And I've seen photos of it eating an entire bird before. I think the bird was probably dead before it came into contact with the anemone. But that's the magnitude of the prey that it will consider tackling. So that's one of the biggest species. Here is one of the smallest species. So this brooding anemone. So I'm again showing you two of the different color morphs. The pink, which is the more common one on the left. And then sometimes you see this blue color that I'm showing you on the right. These are identified both by striping on the column, but also striping across the oral disc. And so this brooding anemone gets its name because it's a very maternal anemone in that it hosts young around its trunk. So I think you can see on the pink picture on the left, it has this little nursery of smaller baby anemones that it's sheltering under its main crown. And sometimes you can have as many as 100 or so of these tiny baby anemones that it's sprouting, and then eventually they go off and make their own way in the world. Okay, next up, sea stars. So again, like anemones, these I think are crowd pleasers because we have many different species. We have about 30 different species of sea stars. Again, they're easy to find because they're quite big, and many different colors and morphologies as well. One of the most common sea stars that you're going to find around the Pacific Northwest is the ochre star. So the ochre star comes in a number, again, of different color varieties. Around here on the southern part of Vancouver Island, it's the purple one that's most common. Once you work your way up the west coast, the orange ones start to be more common. And then I've noticed that in the Strait of Georgia, it's the pink colored that I see most often. So these are 5-armed stars, and sometimes you'll see them on their tippy toes, like you can see on the right hand side. So this isn't just kind of a spot of sea star yoga. This is a spawning pose. So when sea stars are getting ready to procreate, they stand up like this on their tippy toes and they release the gametes from under their armpits. And so you'll often see these sort of clouds of spawn being released from sea stars if they're standing on their tiptoes like this. The species that's most commonly confused with the ochre star is this mottled star. So it's a 5-armed species, comes in a range of different colors. And you can see that there are a number of similarities between this mottled star and the ochre star. But there are two main ways that you can tell the difference between the two. The first is that if I just go back to the ochre star, you can see if you look in this picture here on the left, the central body is quite chunky, and likewise the limbs are a little bit sort of shorter and stubbier compared to the mottled star, which is a lot finer, and its rays are sort of more elongated. The second way to distinguish them is that even though there are white speckles on the mottled star, it's pretty flat, whereas you can make out, particularly in this picture on the right here, this ochre star, that the white speckles are really quite spiny. And so that's the two different ways that you can distinguish the ochre star and the mottled star. Another really common one all around the Pacific Northwest is the leather star, and that is the one on the left here. So unlike many of the other species, the leather star really just comes in one color and pattern. So it's always this sort of reddish orange mottled pattern on top of a sort of grayish yellow background. But nonetheless, it's often confused for this other species, which I'm showing on the right, which is the bat star. So you can see where the similarity comes in. They both normally have 5 arms, and they have this kind of webbing between the arms. But the bat star can come in a range of different colors, and it doesn't have this same mottling that the leather star has. So the bat star is sometimes this kind of uniform dark gray, sometimes it's more of an orange rusty color, but it doesn't have the speckled pattern. The other way that you can distinguish these two species is the bat star is very particular about its habitat. You're only going to find this on the sort of northwest coast of Vancouver Island. We don't find this really anywhere else around Vancouver Island or the Southern Gulf Islands or the Lower Mainland, because again, it really likes that sort of pounding swell of the outer coast. This is possibly one of my favorite sea stars. Everyone has to have a favorite sea star. This is one of mine. It's the cushion star. It's got this lovely kind of pludgy shape to it. It's so puffy, you almost can't see the separate arms from it, hence the name cushion star. But you definitely do not want to get snuggled up to one of these, because its alternative common name is the slime star. So if you pick one of these up, it is going to ooze mucus all over you. They actually have to keep these well separated in aquaria from other species, because if there's any interaction, there's just mucus everywhere. So anyway, I like to call it the cushion star, but the slime star is another accurate description of it. So all of the sea stars that I've shown you so far have got 5 arms, but that is not always the case. And it's not always the case for 2 reasons. So the first reason is that sea stars have this incredible ability to regenerate their limbs. And so if a sea star loses a limb in an accident, for example, it can regrow it. But sometimes the sea star will spontaneously grow more than the nominal 5 limbs. So all of the species that I've shown you up until now, sometimes you'll see them with 6 arms, sometimes even rarely 7. This is an example of a species called the giant pink star, which is normally a 5-armed star, but you can see it's growing 2 extra kind of stubby appendages here. I don't know why, maybe just because it can. So sometimes you're going to see sea stars with more than 5 arms because they are just slight mutations or growing extra arms. But sometimes you're going to see sea stars with more than 5 arms because there are some species that naturally have 10, 11, 12, up to 30 arms to them. This is one that we very commonly see around Vancouver Island. It's called the striped sunstar. This one comes in lots and lots of different color varieties. It's usually just the background color, though, that's different. Sometimes it's yellow, sometimes it's this bright pink, sometimes it's tangerine orange, but almost always the stripe that you see going all the way from the central disc out to the tippy ends of the arms is always this kind of lovely cerulean blue color. So very, very pretty one, this one. This is another many-armed star. Again, this is another of my favorites. It's kind of hard to choose between your children. So this is the rose star, and I've shown you a number of different individuals here because I like to think of rose stars as like snowflakes, because they have this very delicate pattern to them, often in kind of a concentric kind of symmetry. But everyone is unique. So I have photos of many of these, and they're all different, and particularly because they have this sort of fuzzy texture on their surface, the sort of the sensory surface. They do really have this kind of sense of being snowflakes. This is another many-armed sunstar. So this one is the northern sunstar. So you can see, if you look closely, that this particular individual has got the ends of its arms slightly curled up like this. And I often see that happening. I don't know why, but I will tell you that sea stars have eyes on the ends of their arms. Now, they're obviously not complex eyes like our own are. They're really just clumps of photosensitive cells. But scientists have figured out, through sort of doing experiments out in the wild and moving sea stars around in their habitats and doing it at night and day in different seasons, they figured out that their vision is good to about 10 meters. And so when I see sea stars like this with their arms curled up, I like to imagine that they're checking me out. We're having sort of an interspecies interaction. This one is often many people's favorite. So this is the sunflower star. So this is the biggest sea star species in the world. And we are so lucky to have them along our coastline. These are mammoth creatures. They can grow to up to 1 meter across. They are also the speediest of sea stars in the world. So they can go at the hefty sprinting pace of 1 meter a minute. So it's actually quite fun when you find one of these and you just sort of bob on the surface and just kind of watch it meandering around. But the sad story of the sunflower star is that amongst many other of the sea star species, it was very badly hit by the sea star wasting disease around a decade ago. And so ochre stars as well were very badly hit by this. It's estimated that an astounding 1 billion, 1 billion sunflower stars died in the course of the wasting disease, and they're now listed on the critically endangered species list. However, I have to say, around Vancouver Island, we are seeing them come back, and I often encounter sunflower stars now when I snorkel around the island, and every time it's a sheer pleasure because they're such beauties, but also to appreciate how lucky we are to be able to see them when entire tracts of the North American coastline, they've just been completely wiped out. Okay, next up, nudibranchs. Now, this is the marine biology section, so I expect most of you know what nudibranchs are, but when I give this public talk, many people are hearing the word nudibranch for the first time, and I always tell them, if you don't know what a nudibranch is yet, then your life is about to be changed forever. Because snorkelers, divers, beach enthusiasts, we all love nudibranchs, and they're the darling of the underwater photographer because they're just such perfect models for our photography. Okay, so what is a nudibranch? Just in case you don't know, a nudibranch is a sea slug, but I feel like this term sea slug doesn't do justice to the incredible beauty and diversity of these critters. Start off by showing you a picture of one of the biggest and one of the smallest that I have encountered. So on the right, you're seeing a picture of an orange peel nudibranch. So these can grow up to 1 foot long. So these are real giants in the nudibranch world. And on the left, this is a picture of a branch dendronotid. This guy was maybe 1/2 centimeter big on this little piece of kelp that was wafting in the current. It's very, very difficult to get a good photograph of this guy. But this is just to say that the scale of these sea slugs is huge. So the name nudibranch means naked gills. And so that is one of the key characteristics of these critters. So the gill structures can be in various places around the body. So on the left here, I'm showing you a picture of the diamondback tritonia, really beautiful species. And it's the kind of the clumps of sort of feathery structures that you can see down its back that are its gills. And then on the right, this is a leopard dorid, and it's this sort of fluffy structure on its bum, its branchial plume. That is the gill structure of this particular species. So amongst the species of nudibranchs that you can see the snorkeling or even just beach combing at low tide or on docks, these are 3 that are quite common and yet very easily confused. So it is my kind of public service to tell you how you can distinguish these 3 nudibranchs, because it happens a lot that I go out snorkeling with friends and I'll say, Sara, I've seen a nudibranch. And I'll say, great, what have you found? And they'll say, it's the yellow one. And I sort of throw my hands up in despair. So I'm going to teach you the difference between these 3 different types of yellow nudibranch. Okay, so probably the more common one that you're going to see is the one on the right. So this is a Monterey Dorade. And the way that you can tell if you have a Monterey Dorade is very, very easy, because you can see it's got all this bumpy structures on its body. Those are called the tubercles. And for a Monterey Dorade, some of those tubercles are dark brown or even black. So you can see them here. So if you have dirty tubercles, you have a Monterey Dorade. On the other hand, if we take a look at this lower left, there's a pair of nudibranchs here. If, on the other hand, you see dark patches that are on the main body, but not on the tubercles itself. So you can see here, we've got those bumpy structures, those tubercles, but the dark patches are on the main part of the body. They don't stray up to the tubercles themselves. Then you have yourself a noble sea lemon. And the noble sea lemons are also generally quite a bit bigger than the Monterey Dorades. They can be sort of 4 to 6 inches, whereas your typical Monterey Dorade is maybe 1 to 2 inches. The third one, which will often fox people, this is actually the rarest of the three, is the Heath's Dorade. So it also has these dark freckles on it, but these dark freckles are not the tubercles themselves. They are on the body. There's also a subtle difference in the shape of the body. These two are quite domed and rounded, whereas the Heath Dorade tends to be quite a bit flatter and have these kind of raggedy looking edges to it. So there you go. Now you are an expert on these 3 different yellow nudibranchs. And if you ever come snorkeling with me, you'll be able to tell me exactly which one we found. Okay, another sort of characteristic of some nudibranch species are these sort of frilly structures, these long structures that we call serrata. So serrata have a few different purposes. Nominally, they are an extension to the digestive tract of the nudibranch. So when you can see these long parts here, and you can see the sort of white cores, that is part essentially of the intestine of the nudibranch. Now, nudibranchs eat a number of different foods, but one of the things that some of the species eat are anemone tentacles. And so they store the stinging cells from the anemone tentacles in their digestive tract. And so if predators come along and try to take a bite out of them, they get this nasty taste from the anemone sting that they're storing in their serrata. So the serrata are also a defense mechanism. They are also a defense mechanism in the sense that some of the species can shed the serrata entirely. So this is the case, for example, with this beautiful golden dorona that we can see on the right here. And so if under attack, the nudibranch can shed some of its serrata, and they stay kind of wiggling in the water like a decoy, so that they can, as fast as they can, wiggle off in the opposite direction. Another interesting fun fact about nudibranchs is that they are hermaphroditic. So that means they have both male and female sex organs. And so when you see 2 nudibranchs lined up like this, head to tail, this is how they mate. So they are simultaneously joining their male and female sex organs so that they can both fertilize each other's eggs at the same time. There's a beautiful pair of cockerel's dorades. These are quite small. They're maybe 2 centimeters long, but really, really pretty ones. So we think of sea slugs as sort of crawling along the bottom of the ocean, either on sand or on rocks, or munching away on seaweeds. And sure enough, that's often where we see them. But also some nudibranchs have the ability to swim. And this is one of the most famous swimming nudibranchs. So this is the giant nudibranch, or the giant dendronotid. As the name conveys, it's also one of the larger ones. So you typically sort of 8 to 10 inches or so. And again, incredible morphology, all of these branching appendages. And I see this just as often swimming in the water column, which is what you can see on the right here, as I do when it's just sort of cruising along the bottom. When it's cruising along the bottom, it's usually looking for its favorite prey, which are tube-dwelling anemones. So these are anemones that bury themselves in a sort of sandy shale bottom and just have the tentacles poking up. And so these giant dendronauts, they cruise around the bottom trying to sniff out these tube-dwelling anemones. When they find one, they actually rear up on their, I can't really say hind legs, but they rear up and they pounce down on these anemones. It's really quite something to see. Okay, next up, jellies. I'm not going to go through jellies in a lot of detail. We have an incredible diversity of jellies in our waters. Most of them are completely harmless and don't sting. There are a couple of exceptions. One of them is the one in the lower left here. This is the sea nettle. And the other one is the lion's mane jellyfish, which I don't have a picture of here to show you. But apart from that, you can swim with jellies and not have to worry about being stung. And as I said, the diversity of the jellies that we have in our waters is just stupendous. Sizes, shapes, colors, just incredible variety. One of my favorites is this one in the top left here. This is a really small one. It's usually only about a centimeter long. I like to call this one the brain in the bell jar, because that's exactly what it looks like to me. And sometimes you're lucky enough to encounter massive smacks. So smack is the collective noun for jelly. Massive smacks of jellies that have all been washed into a bay. This is a picture that I took just a couple of weeks ago here on Vancouver Island when I was snorkeling in East Souk Park, and in one of the bays there were literally millions of these cross jellies, and it was like swimming in jelly soup. So this is me. I'm literally at the surface here, and all these sort of herring have kind of got confused, I think, in the kelp forest with all of these jellies around. They're looking a bit lost. Swimming in a soup of jellies is like being in a David Attenborough documentary. I mean, I just can't tell you the wonders that we have right here in our waters. And then there are so many other things. Honestly, I could go on all night, but I won't. So in addition to the species that I've shared so far, I have barely scratched the surface of the incredible things that we have to see. I love to see the Puget Sound king crabs. These come up from the deep in the wintertime when they're trying to mate, and they have these incredible colors. We have corals in our water, both hard and soft corals. My favorite are these red soft corals. You get these in large colonies up in the north of Vancouver Island. We have sea pens, which are a little bit like orange ostrich feathers that grow a foot or two out of the seafloor. Feather duster worms, like colorful starbursts that grow all over docks. So yes, I could go on and on, but I really feel like I have to just sort of finish the species list, of course, with probably the most famous denizen of our waters, which is the giant Pacific octopus. And you can see octopus when you're snorkeling. You don't have to be scuba diving. This particular photo I took whilst I was on the surface, and it was just resting on a rock a couple of feet below me. So I hope that I've convinced you that there is a lot to see, and now you want to get into the water and see it all for yourself. And so now comes the question, okay, Sara, what gear do I need? Because as I said in my introduction, our experiments with surf wetsuits just didn't cut it. And this was a big part of my own journey, was figuring out what gear I needed to stay warm. So over in Vancouver, you're very lucky. There's a fantastic store called Diving Sports, and they have all the kinds of gear that I'm going to tell you about, because this is very different to scuba diving gear. So we don't use dry suits. These are very big and bulky and don't allow us to regulate our buoyancy. So we need something different. And so the kind of suit that we use for snorkeling and free diving is the same as well that people who do spearfishing use. And it's a very particular kind of wetsuit. So this is normally where I'm going to do my show and tell. I'm not sure how well it's going to work over Zoom. So in anticipation, I've just put in a slide to show you the wetsuit that I have. So this is the exact one that I have. But just to sort of talk you through a few of the key features of the kind of wetsuit that you need that would allow you to stay warm all year round snorkeling in our waters. So there are a few key features here. The first is that it is a two-piece wetsuit. So there's the sort of the Farmer John / Farmer Jane, and then a top. So this means you've got a double layer of neoprene over your core. The second key feature is that there is an integrated hood. So when I first started out, I had a wetsuit without a hood, and then I just had a separate hood that I kind of tucked in. And this was just an invitation for the ocean to come flooding in through all the gaps that, despite my best efforts, I just couldn't seal it off. So this way, it's actually really hard for the water to get in. And I find if I'm in the ocean for less than half an hour, when I take my wetsuit off, I'm actually still completely dry underneath. So this system makes a really nice seal around your body. But perhaps the most important thing is the kind of neoprene that this is made out of. So the first is that it's a much thicker neoprene than your average surf wetsuit. So for those of you who are in the know about wetsuit thicknesses, so this is 7 millimeters. So this means over my core, I have 14 millimeters between the bottom and the top. But the other key phrase to know is that this is called open cell neoprene. So what does open cell mean? So this is where I'm going to try and show you my suit so you can see what I mean. So if you've owned a wetsuit before, you're used to having this kind of fabric on the outside. So essentially all wetsuits have this sort of nylon outer to them. And that is a covering that keeps it from tearing and ripping and snagging. So it's a protective layer. But with an open cell suit, the inside, I don't know how well you can see it, the inside is just raw rubber. So that protective nylon is not there. This is just raw rubber. And that is what we mean by open cell. And the key is that open cell, that raw rubber, if you were to look at it under a microscope, you'll see tiny, tiny bubbles in the rubber, and they form a suction with your skin. And so it's really like having your own blubber layer, like directly suctioned onto your skin. So this open cell keeps you really, really warm. So Diving Sports has all these open cell wetsuits in stock. They also have them online. They have a really good flat rate shipping. It's $15 flat rate shipping anywhere in Canada. So you can get yourself a suit. I'm just going to show you a few other things. So we'll see if this works over Zoom. So just give me a second here. So you've got your wetsuit now, but you're really, really buoyant because all of these layers of neoprene give you incredible buoyancy, which is fantastic for beginners and for safety because it is impossible to sink. Like you can try and your friends will have a good laugh at you because you'll try to go down and you'll bob straight up like a cork. But at some point, you might decide that you actually want to dive down a little bit. Maybe, if you've been tropical snorkeling, it's nice to dive down and take a closer look at something. So what you then might want to invest in is one of these. So this is my weight belt. So we were actually talking before the talk with Joan, and she was saying, she was happy she didn't have to wear weight anymore. Well, actually, I do have weight. This is about 15 pounds of lead. If you go the route of buying yourself a weight belt, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to not overweight yourself for obvious reasons, because you wear too much lead, you're going to end up where you don't want to be. So it's beyond the scope of this talk for me to kind of give the full safety spiel about weighting, but a good rule of thumb is that you should always start experimenting with a little bit at a time. You go to a local beach, you're in your wetsuit, your full wetsuit, you walk in at the shallows with your weight belt on and you exhale, like you do a full exhale. So the reason that you do this is you want to make yourself as less buoyant as possible. So you get rid of all the air in your lungs. And you want to make sure that when you do that, your nose and your mouth is still above the waterline. So you want to be positively buoyant. If you're wearing too much lead and you're sinking, then you walk back to the beach and you take some off. Okay, the other thing that I want to show you are my fins. So I actually started snorkeling without wearing any fins at all. So you don't need fins, but they're useful if you want to kind of get from A to B with a little bit more power. And there's also a safety aspect here, because if you find yourself in any kind of current, then they're handy for being a bit of extra power. So most people start off with fins like this, which are just kind of cheap plastic scuba fins. I think I got these from Costco. And these are perfectly fine. You know, you'll do just fine in these. But if you really want to indulge your inner mermaid fetish, you will end up with fins like this, which I have to stand way back so they fit on the camera. So these are freediving fins. So, I mean, obviously they're much longer. These particular ones are made of carbon fiber. You can also find them in plastic. This is basically, you know, just to give you extra power. I just wear them because they make me feel like a mermaid. So that's why I have these fins. I also have gloves and neoprene socks. These are pretty standard things. And then the mask and the snorkel itself are, as I say, just standard, nothing fancy. The last piece of gear I do want to show you, though, is my camera, because people often ask me about my underwater photos. So I am ready to admit I am no skilled photographer. I take all of my photos on this little point and shoot. So this is an Olympus TG6. So it is waterproof to 15 meters, and I don't go deeper than 15 meters. Some people put it in a housing. So if you want to go deeper than 15 meters, you have to put it in a housing, but I don't. So I just take it on my wrist strap. I just take it like this, and I have it on the automatic underwater settings. So I really don't do anything fancy. It's Mother Nature that does all the hard work in providing the models, rather than me doing anything fancy. Okay, so now you're all set. You know what gear you need, and so the last question is, where should I go snorkeling? Now, I feel a little bit of a pariah, given that this is a Nature Vancouver crowd, because I don't have much experience on the lower mainland, and all of my adventures have been around Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands, and that's the sort of scope of my book as well. So this final section is hopefully going to tempt you over to Vancouver Island. And so in my book, what I do is I split the regions into 5 sections. And so I cover a total of 51 different locations, and each location I have a little bit of an introduction. I list the critters that you're likely to see there and give tips about currents and parking and all the rest of it. What I'm going to do for us tonight here is to just give you my top 3 reasons to go to any one of these 5 general geographic locations. Okay, so first of all, Greater Victoria. I hate to break it to you, Vancouver, but you know, Victoria is our capital city, and so of all of us who work and play in Greater Victoria, it's so nice that we can literally go out from our workplaces, and within pretty much 10 or 15 minutes of anywhere in the Greater Victoria region, we can be at the ocean. And that's even taking into account the traffic. So I think one of the great things about snorkeling around Vancouver, all jokes aside, is that we just have this incredibly easy access. And we have access to incredible places and incredible natural events. And one of them, which happens predictably every summer, is that in the Saanich Inlet, which, if you're unfamiliar with the Greater Victoria region, so Victoria down here on the south of the peninsula, so Schwartz Bay, the place that you go to spend hours of your life, is up here. And so this is the Saanich Inlet right here. And in the summertime, so July and August, you can go to see incredible bioluminescence. So if you go snorkeling at night, it's like swimming in a galaxy of stars, because the phosphorescent algae, once they're agitated when you're swimming in them, it just lights up all around you, and it's just magical. Another very special ecosystem for the whole of the West Coast is the kelp forests, and we're lucky that we have many of them around the Greater Victoria area. One of the most easily accessible and one of the most famous ones is along the Ogden Point breakwater, which is where all of the big cruise ships come in. It's right in the downtown area. And so again, just such easy access into this wonderful underwater world. When you're swimming through these kelp forests, again, feels like you're just in a documentary, and you'll see, obviously all the fish that live amongst the kelp forest, nudibranchs that are on the, living on the fronds. I've seen octopus in the kelp forest. I've seen seals, otters. It's just terrific. Okay, next up is the West Coast. By this, I mean the outer West Coast of Vancouver Island. Really, my sort of top reason to go here is that it is like wilderness, but right on our doorstep. So East Souk in particular, this is 45 to 60 minutes drive from downtown Victoria. And yet, in terms of the marine biodiversity, it's total wilderness. And so this is where I spend most of my weekends snorkeling. And because of the exposure of that coast to that, to the open Pacific Ocean through the Juan de Fuca Strait, there are species here that you don't tend to find in other places because they thrive in that exposed environment. So I've already mentioned the bat stars, and another of these very pretty sea star species is the rainbow star, which I'm showing you a picture of here, and then the green surf anemones, which I've already mentioned. Okay, now working our way up the east coast of Vancouver Island. So this is the same kind of habitat that you can get to see on the lower mainland. So one of the great things about the Strait of Georgia is that if you snorkel in the wintertime, which you can do when you have one of these thick wetsuits, is that the visibility of the water is just spectacular. So if it weren't for the temperature, it would feel almost tropical because you can just sort of see forever through the water column. The flip side is that if you're a beginner, you don't yet have a fancy wetsuit, or you just don't really like the cold water, this same stretch of water gets really nice and warm during the summer. So it can be in the high teens. So for many people, that's warm enough that they don't need to wear any wetsuit at all. And then my other top tip for this part of the coastline is an incredible location to go snorkeling around shipwrecks. So shipwrecks are a favorite with scuba divers, but you don't have to be a scuba diver to enjoy them. And so around Royston, which is up here at number 42 on my map, there's about a dozen deliberately scuttled ships that were put there to form a natural breakwater. And some of these ships are really quite large. They're all rusted down now. This is a picture of me snorkeling around one of these old rusty hulls. And these wrecks are just covered with anemones and sea stars, and just super accessible from the coast in Royston. Then the Gulf Islands. So my sort of top reason for going to explore the Gulf Islands is, much though as an islander, I love to disparage BC ferries. We are actually incredibly lucky that in an easy day trip, we can go and visit any one of half a dozen or so different islands there and back in a day. It's the perfect way to spend a summer day. And then in terms of specific locations, I have two particular favorites. So one of them I mentioned right at the beginning of the talk, which was on Saturna Island, this section called Cliffside, where you have these massive colonies of giant plumose anemones. And that's what you can see in this picture here. These are really tall, they look like big white cauliflowers, and the cliffs at Cliffside are just covered with them. And the same at this other location on Saturna called Echo Bay. And these are right in the intertidal zone. You snorkel at the surface and you can just see them extending many, many meters below you. And then my other favorite spot in the Gulf Islands is on Pender Island, a place called Peter Cove. And this is fantastic if you're a nudibranch lover. So every time I go, I see 10 or so different species. So not just 10 individuals, I mean 10 different species of nudibranchs. So this is the best place that I found if you want to see lots of different species of nudibranch. And then the very final section that I'll talk about is the North Island. So this really is the sort of the last frontier, I think, in terms of Vancouver Island snorkeling. It takes a bit more effort to get to, but maybe not as much effort as you think. It's only 6 hours drive from Victoria to Port Hardy, which is really not too bad. And once you're up there, the things that you will see are just going to blow your mind. And so again, if you go at this time of year, so September, October in particular, you get just fantastic visibility. And the things that you'll see up there, there are some species that you're going to see up in the North Island that you just don't see down south or in the Strait of Georgia or even in the Juan de Fuca Strait. And one of those species is these beauties here, which you can see in this picture. So this is a basket star. So this is actually not a sea star, it's a brittle star, which is taxonomically distinct. And normally you only see these really deep. So scuba divers will get to see these, but even they have to hunt for them. They're not common. But there are several locations that I have found in the North Island where I can reliably go and find basket stars in the top 5 meters or so. So this is really, really special. And then the last reason to go up to the North Island is to see the fabled Browning Wall. So Browning Wall, as I say, is sort of mythical amongst scuba divers. It was one of Jacques Cousteau's top 10 dive sites anywhere in the world. It's on the coast of Nige Island. So it's this number 51 on my map. So you do need a boat to get to this one. So I usually go on a charter. And what you will see is that the wall, the east wall of Nige Island, just from the surface, it just descends vertically for a few hundred meters. It just goes straight down. And that vertical wall is just covered with life. There is not an inch that doesn't have an anemone or a sea star or a nudibranch, something, a sponge, a coral growing on it. It is truly, truly amazing. So with that, I will thank you very much for your attention. I see there are already a few questions in the chat, and so I pass it back over to Joan to moderate the questions. Thanks very much, everybody.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that, Sara. I'm just going to go back to my gallery view. Yeah, that was excellent. Okay, you've got me intrigued. I think I have to actually try this. Okay, let's see here. We're going to come down to some questions. Yeah, so there was one about the camera, which you did answer. This is Paul from Salt Spring. He says he's got your book and it's fantastic. Oh yes, well, we will ask you just maybe to show a cover, the book cover, if you have it handy there, so everybody knows what.
Give me 1 second. I should have got this ready, but I'll go to the other room and I bring it right back. Hang on.
Okay.
Of my piles of things that I got ready, I didn't get my book. Okay.
Oh, yes, there we go. There's the book cover. Okay, so Paul says he's got your book. And he was saying, could you talk a little bit more about the camera equipment you use, which you did. I'm going to just add to that. Do you use a flash on your camera or not when you're photographing?
No, I don't. And actually, that's the one manual intervention that I make, is that I turn off the automatic flash. And the reason is that there's often particulates in the water. And so if I have the flash on, I get a lot of backscatter. So because I'm not going deep, unless if it's a really, really dark overcast day, it might be a bit more of a challenge, but generally there's enough natural light that I find I don't need a flash. And actually I will sometimes turn the exposure down. So there's this handy wheel on the top here. That means, again, I don't have to know anything about apertures and f-stops and exposures. With this, I just know it dials down the exposure time. And so if I'm taking a picture of something that's bright white on a sunny day, I just kind of dial that down. But that's really the extent of my photographic knowledge.
And that camera is not specifically for, you can take it underwater, but it's not a underwater camera.
Yeah, that's right. So Olympus market this as their tough series. So that's what the TG is for. And so it's just a general outdoor camera. So it's great if you're kayaking because you don't have to worry about it getting splashed. You can drop it and apparently it doesn't break. I'm not going to recommend you drop it to try it. They've actually literally just brought out the new version of this, which is the TG7. I haven't road tested it yet, but I know many people who are still using a TG4, TG5, and they seem very happy with it. So this is what most snorkelers use to take their pictures. The trickiest part, so in terms of getting good photos, the biggest skill, the most important skill I had to learn was how to stay still. Because in the water, you're just always moving. There's always a little bit of current or a little bit of wave action, or the thing you're moving, the thing you're trying to take a photo of is moving. So if it's a jelly or a nudibranch on a piece of kelp. And so just being able to stay still for that second that you're taking the image. And so often what I will do is I'll go down and I'll rest it on a rock like this and then take the picture, or I'll rest it on myself. So to try to make an artificial tripod, that was the skill that I had to learn much more than playing with the settings.
Yeah, I can imagine that challenge of trying to stay still when you don't have a buoyancy control device on. So coming to a different question, Teresa was mentioning, you said that some anemones are carnivorous. She says, I thought they all were. What do the other ones eat?
Yeah, I think, yeah, so that's fair. I think they will also eat, random debris that comes their way. So yes, my intent was to say they don't only eat meat. They will eat other things as well.
Right, fair enough. Do you ever use a dive light, even though you are staying on or near the surface?
Nope.
Oh, no dive light at all?
Nope.
Even at night?
Nope.
All right.
If I'm snorkeling at night, it's usually to see the bioluminescence, and so I don't want to. I actually want to be dark adapted.
You don't really want to know what's down there below you at night, do you?
So I have to admit, night snorkeling is a whole other level of adventure. I mean, I have done it, but I find it quite scary, to be honest. So when I go at night to see the bioluminescence, I'm usually just floating in the shallows. Yeah.
Fair enough. So Susan was saying the photo, I think she's talking about the photo of you snorkeling by the ship there at Royston, shows that the face is exposed, even though the rest of the body is in a wetsuit. Do you not chill because of that?
So when the water is cold and you first get in, then yes, your face does feel cold, but that sensation soon goes away. I think it just goes numb. And so I find that sensation passes very quickly, and then I don't feel cold. So the time when I start to feel cold is when my core starts to get chilled, or if my hands and feet start to feel cold. So yeah, the cold face, it happens, but it passes very quickly.
I think our faces are tougher than what maybe some of the rest of the parts of our body are. So question from Anne Parkinson, who is a snorkeler on Salt Spring Island. She said, is an open cell suit difficult to get on? In my old diving days, we would wear suits of bare rubber 2 sides, and we use cornstarch or baby powder for ease of pulling on the suit.
Yes. So open cell suits are notoriously sticky because it's like trying to pull rubber. If you try to just put it onto your bare skin, it's basically impossible. And so you have to lubricate the suit first. And so you can do this in a few different ways. So you can either buy wetsuit lubricant. So a famous brand is called Slippy. And so you buy it from any dive store and you just kind of squirt it into the wetsuit, and it's sort of a soapy liquid. And at that point, like once the inside of the wetsuit is lubricated, it's actually really easy it literally just slips on. It's very, very easy once lubricated. But most people don't buy the kind of commercial stuff because it gets expensive quickly if you're snorkeling a lot. And so most people have a DIY version. So my DIY version is I have a spray, like a dollar store spray bottle. And in it, I put 1 part hair conditioner to 10 parts water, approximately. I don't measure it. I kind of learn, I'm like, it's about 1 part, and I kind of top it up and shake it so it dissolves. Other people use dish soap. in the same kind of ratio. And so, yeah, so you just spray it all in there. Other people will make up like a really big, like a milk jug of it and pour it in and slosh it around. I use the spray bottle, and it does the job. And as long as you've got enough in there, then it just slips on. But I do recommend, if you get one of these, the first time you put it on, have a friend handy, because the classic thing is to get your head stuck in the neck part because you haven't lubricated that enough. so having a friend around to help kind of pull it on is quite handy. I my first time was quite comical. I was down in our basement trying it on and had to call for my husband for help. But once it's lubricated and you've done it a couple of times, then it's fine.
All right, good advice. Yeah, it's wetsuits aren't that easy to get on. Laura was wondering if you have any books, or do you plan on any, on astronomy?
So this is a good question. Most astronomers write books on astronomy, but I have to say it doesn't call to me. I feel like I don't need to spend my spare time writing about my day job. And that's what made this project so appealing, was that it was actually really a departure from what I did in my day job. So the short answer is no, I don't have any plans to write a book out about astronomy. Maybe another one about snorkeling though.
So the name of the book, it's the same as the title of our talk tonight, right? Snorkeling Adventures in the Gulf Islands and Vancouver Island, right? Yeah, somebody said you held it up too quickly and they couldn't see it. So yeah, it's exactly the same as the name of the talk tonight, for Pat.
And you'll be able to find it in any bookstore, and it's on Amazon.ca as well. You can find it on the ferry, in the ferry gift store. So yeah, it's around.
Yay, I'll go look tomorrow. What about fish? Shannon is wondering, do you see fish?
Yes.
Do you photograph fish?
Yes, but I'm really bad at taking pictures of fish because they move too quickly. So one of my favorite things to see on the fishy front, and we see a lot of them at the moment, are these huge bait balls of herring. Thousands of herring all swarming together. So there's lots of these smaller fish, but then there are also the big famous varieties as well. So lingcod, that could be several feet. The cabezon, which are also big. Greenling species are very colorful as well. And then there are some quite exotically colored fish like the red Irish lord as well. And then everybody's favorite is the Pacific spiny lumpsucker, which is only about this big and is really, really cute, but very, very difficult to find. So yes, lots of fish as well. I didn't show any just because my photographic skills of moving objects is fairly poor.
I can sympathize with that. Janet is wondering if you use standard scuba diving gloves or something different.
Yeah, so these are just standard. They're 5 mil standard neoprene, and the same with the socks. And so I just make sure they're tucked up inside the cuffs of my wetsuit, and that minimizes how much water gets in. It is usually, if anything gets cold, it's usually my hands and feet that go first. But I'm a particularly kind of cold-blooded creature. I get cold very, very easily. I'm usually, when I go out with a group, I'm usually the first to get cold. But yeah, so they're just standard gloves and socks.
So on that same line, Shannon is wondering, when you are chilled, is that it for the day, or do you come out for a bit, take off the suit, warm up, and get back in? Or just
it depends how chilled if it's a winter day and it's raining, then usually once is enough. But if it's summertime and you can get out, you can sit on the beach, warm up, then I'll go back in again. Yeah.
So lots of great comments, thank you for an engaging presentation, and lots of people mentioned, yeah, I've got the book. What about encountering sea lions? Is that dangerous?
So I get asked this question quite a bit. So I find there's a big difference between sea lions and seals. So seals, I find, tend to be very sort of curious and playful, and they'll come and check you out, and then they'll go swim away for a bit, and you really have this sense that they're being playful. Sea lions is another kettle of fish. They are huge creatures, and they have an air to them that is much more kind of boisterous. And if they swim with you for more than sort of 5 minutes or so, they start to get so confident that often they'll try to take a little nip at like your fins or like the neoprene on your suit. I don't like this at all. I mean, there are some people doesn't bother them. So I do not like sea lions. I don't know of anybody who's actually truly been in danger because of them, but I find their presence threatening. And so if there are big sea lions around, I usually get out. I should also, of course, emphasize that there are very strict rules about approaching marine mammals. Now, of course, you know, if they're coming up to you, then, you know, there's sort of a different kettle of fish, but you shouldn't be actively seeking them and actively swimming after them.
Right. Yeah. Good point about that. So question from Sheila about how many times a month or per week do you snorkel? And and how many years did you snorkel before feeling prepared enough to write the book?
So I have this really annoying thing called a day job. so that sort of limits my snorkeling. You know, during the summer when it's late, it's easier to kind of get out after work. Obviously, it's a bit more limited during the winter hours. I would say, I mean, I try to get in the water at least once a week, twice if I can. In terms of how long so I've been a lifelong tropical snorkeler. So, you know, I've been in and out of warm waters around the world my entire adult life. And so I've always felt comfortable in the water and enjoyed the water environment. In terms of how long it took me to feel prepared to write the book, that was sort of 1.5 years of intensive, like during COVID, like really intensive. I was snorkeling kind of every other day. And, you know, all of our travel and weekends, you know, my husband is an extremely patient man. And, you know, as a scientist, I'm a bit of an obsessive data nerd. And so I would log everything, you know, every detail of every outing. And that's sort of how the book evolved, was really just from obsessive note-taking. That in the end, my husband said, you know, that should be a book. So that's how it happened.
Somebody had to call it. So Jasper's wondering, is it hard to use your camera with the gloves?
Yeah. So when I first got the camera, I wasn't sure about this. And so I bought it at London Drugs. And so I went into London Drugs with my gloves so that I could try manipulating it. And because I'm not trying to, you know, in detail change the settings, all I really have to do is to turn it on and off. And so the button on the top is easy to do that. If you're a more skilled photographer than me and you're wanting to, you know, use the buttons on the back, this is actually where having a housing can be helpful, because the custom housing that comes with the camera, the buttons on the outside of the housing kind of fit over these and they're much bigger. So it's much easier to manipulate the controls. So yeah, so if you have trouble manipulating the camera, that's the solution that many people will turn to. But I don't find it's a problem.
All right. Yeah, it's always a little bit clumsier doing things with gloves on, even if it's just like winter gloves and trying to hold on to your phone. Do you generally snorkel with one partner?
So sometimes one, or sometimes in a group. But yes, having a buddy is an important aspect of the safety. And also, you know, I find 2 sets of eyes or multiple sets of eyes for finding stuff is also good. So yes, having a buddy is important. But luckily, this is now a very rapidly growing community, and so I've never found it hard to find friends.
So is your husband one of those snorkeling partners?
He sure is.
Oh, he is. Okay, that's good. Otherwise, he's waiting on the shore a lot while you're in the water. Jennifer is wondering if the conditioner or soap that you use, like for the suit, is it biodegradable?
So there's quite a bit of literature on this actually, and the sort of conventional wisdom is that because none of it really gets out, so you've sprayed it on the inside, and as I mentioned earlier, there's really, with these wetsuits, there's really not a lot of ingress and egress, and so so I just buy the whatever is on special at London Drugs on any given month, and just buy the cheapest stuff, because it doesn't seem to leak out.
And you have to rinse it out of the suit afterwards, I would think, eh?
Yeah, that's right. So, which, you'd want to do anyway because of the salt. So when I get back, so I have a big Rubbermaid that I have in the back of my car. So I just take all my gear off, dump it in that, then carry it to the back garden, fill it up with the hose, rinse everything up. Hang it up.
All right. Yeah, I would think you would have had to wash that out of the inside as well, but also the outside, right, because of the salt. Shannon is curious about the cost on suits and camera. So what is the cost to get into this?
Yes. So you can get an open cell, like a 7 mil open cell wetsuit. The sort of the lower end is about $450, and then goes up from there. Mine is actually a lower end one. So the higher end ones, they have things like extra stitching around the cuffs and things like that. I've never found that necessary. And they last a long time. I mean, I've had this wetsuit. I've probably got 300 outings on this wetsuit. So, it's a good investment. The camera, I'm trying to think, when I bought it, I think it was on the order of about $500 for the camera. Yeah.
Probably paid for itself already in the book royalties, hopefully. Do you have a knife when you snorkel in case if you have to cut yourself out of a tangle?
No, I didn't bring it. Oh, hang on. Yes, hang on. Yes. So this is my dive knife. So this is an essential piece of kit that I didn't go through. There is actually, so in my book, there's a whole chapter on gear that sort of talks you through a lot more than I talked through today. So this is a pinch knife. So like it's in its holster, so it can't come loose until you double pinch it, and then it comes out. Some people like to wear this on their upper arm. I wear mine on my calf. And the main reason that you want this is if you get snagged in something. So the fear is, people have this fear of being snagged in kelp. In my experience, that has never happened. I mean, I'm often in kelp, but you give yourself a tug and you're free. The main thing that you risk getting snagged in, particularly if you're in urban environments, is fishing line. So I've never actually had to use my dive knife, but it's an important piece of safety kit. And this, again, you have to rinse the salt off this so it doesn't go rusty. So every time I go out, this gets a rinse. And the same with the camera. So even though it's waterproof, when I come back, I get like a Tupperware box and I put the whole thing in tap water and leave it to soak for 20 minutes so all of the salt comes off. This is really important for the camera.
Well, what was this here? Gail said, can we swim with you?
Yes, come over to Vancouver Island. There's actually, so I'm on a wonderful Facebook group called Snorkelers of BC. And this is a great place for finding buddies, asking questions, sharing photographs and experiences. So I regularly post there, and so that's a great way to meet people.
All right. Well, lots of questions coming in here. Anne was commenting that research is showing cold water swimming has health benefits. Have you found your cold tolerance has increased?
I haven't, but I think that's probably because I'm under all this neoprene. So I think, so the cold water swimming movement, sort of like the Wim Hof movement, is huge. Certainly here, in Victoria, if I go out for a run in the morning, I'll see several groups just swimming in their swimsuits, and I think they're bonkers. but yes, people do find incredible health benefits and find that their cold tolerance increases. I keep thinking I should give this a try and see what it will do for my cold hands, but I haven't yet been brave enough to do it.
So the Janet looked up the price of the TG7. It's listed at $750. Maybe you can get it on sale. I remember trying to get one a number of years ago, and they were not 7, but one of those Tufts, and you had to put your name on a wait list for them.
Well, I bet you now that the TG7 has come out, lots of people are going to want to upgrade their older ones. I bet if you look on, Facebook Marketplace and whatnot, you'll probably find now secondhand TG5s and TG6 coming up.
So the really good question here. Do you usually snorkel at Slack?
So this depends very much on the location. So there are some places that are extremely current sensitive, to the point where maybe you only have like a 30 to 40 minute window before the current is really strong. So for example, there are a few spots like Seymour Narrows, Dodds Narrows, anywhere with the word narrows, like is going to be high current. Now these places often have the best wildlife because that current is bringing in all the nutriment that the various species are chowing on. So yes, for many places I go at slack and I go at low slack, because as a snorkeler rather than a diver, I know I'm not going down 20 meters, so I want the critters to be as close to me as possible. And depending on where you are, so if I'm in Victoria, the difference between high and low tide is only like 2.5 meters. But if I'm in the Strait of Georgia, the difference between high and low tide is 5 meters. And so, if I go at high tide and it's 5 meters, I've got an awful lot of extra water to look through to be seeing stuff. So I usually go at slack low. That said, there are plenty of places, sort of protected bays, where you really don't feel the current at all. And so I for all of the locations in my book, I have a tips section, and so I mentioned there if current is important.
All right. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, that's a good point, that if you're snorkeling, you want to be at the low slack, so you don't have all those feet of water, first of all. And also, I guess if the tide comes in, it pushes you towards shore, not away from shore. So that would be kind of a good second thing. I'm wondering about boater traffic. Like, do you have any concerns about power boats not seeing you? Do you drag something like a float at the surface or something?
So most of the places that I snorkel, it's not an issue, and I'm very close to the shore, and I'm in relatively shallow water. So for the most part, boat traffic's not an issue. But there are a few places that I like to go to where it's like an island offshore, so I have to do a short crossing. And so that again is something that certainly having a buddy is really important. So you've got extra sets of eyes. And then this is also where having a float, so it's you attach it with a rope, and it's a big inflatable orange thing with a dive flag, to help you be more visible. But generally I don't use one because I'm generally not in boating traffic, but if I am, this is the way to alert boats.
Yeah, good. Yeah, it's just sort of one of those concerns that, it's one thing to have a kayak come past you, but another thing to have a powerboat not see you.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So focusing on focusing on the marine fauna and flora specifically, do you have a preference for snorkeling in tropical or temperate waters? Temperature aside.
Yeah. So this is a very interesting question, because pre-COVID, all I had done was tropical snorkeling. And then for 2.5 years during COVID, all I did was cold water snorkeling. And then I think it was like March 2022, we did a first overseas trip again, and we went to Hawaii. And we've been to Hawaii many, many times. We have our favorite places that we like to go snorkeling. And I was kind of disappointed because so tropical snorkeling, you have the huge coral reefs, and you have all the colorful fish. But what I've become so seduced by are the big anemones and these big sea stars and the nudibranchs. And whilst you have nudibranchs in tropical waters, they're really hard to find because they're hiding in all the nooks and crannies of the coral. Whereas here they're much easier to find. And so I am completely a cold water convert now. This said, cold water snorkeling takes more patience, because on any given day, you can get in Hawaii and you're going to the visibility is going to be great, the coral's going to be there. The big challenge for snorkeling around BC is that you never know what the conditions are going to give you. The last time I went out, the visibility was fantastic. We saw these amazing jellies. It was a gift. Other days you can go out and there's a plankton bloom and you can't see 2 feet in front of your face, right? So the way I see the way I see cold water snorkeling is that there's much more variation, but when you get the good days, then they're unbeatable.
And I think that is a wonderful comment to end it on as well. Although somebody, just one added thing here, Banfield Marine Station now has your book as well, apparently. So yeah, it's getting around. But like I say, that a perfect comment to end on, that you're right. I think whether you are looking top of the water, underneath the water, there will be some days that are very like, oh yeah, I saw that. And then there'll be other days that are just going to amaze you with what you encountered, right? Yeah. Yeah. So I think with that, we'll cut off the questions because it's 9 o'clock and I'm sure that you have a class, your day job tomorrow. But just so many comments coming in. Great talk. Thank you. Great discussion. And also your enthusiasm. People love the enthusiasm. So thank you very much, Sara. And I'm the bad one that I didn't buy the book yet. I'm getting it on the ferry tomorrow. Thank you so much. And I'm sure there's going to be your book sales are going to go up after this.
Thank you so much for having me. You're a very welcoming audience.